Hello everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and this is going to be a slightly different type of video compared to what I normally film. I'm at a driving event where I'm going to be driving a bunch of brand new cars back to back, and just because of the pacing of the event, I'm not going to have the time to do like a normal Ben Hardy walk around on the cars. It's going to be more focused on the driving, but we can at least, kind of, I guess, do some walk around stuff at this initial segment here while we're stuck in this traffic. So this is the new Defender 130, and this one is a first edition, and funny enough, I've actually already reviewed this specific car because I had this as a test vehicle for a week, but we'll still talk about it since I'm going to be in this car for the next 31 minutes. So first off, I personally own a Defender. My wife owns one, right? So it's her daily driver. She absolutely loves it, and the 130 was something that we did consider, and I do want to talk about why we chose our 110 over the 130 in this video. But first off, if you're not familiar with the 130 in this first edition package, the 130 is the 3-row Defender. Now the second row in the 130 is really spacious. The third row, it's usable, but it's definitely more usable for kids rather than adults. And then when it comes to other Defender stuff, full digital gauge cluster is available with the Defender. This first edition basically makes this a loaded up Defender. That's what has a digital gauge cluster and this nicer steering wheel with the stitching here on the airbag cover, larger infotainment system. And by the way, this is Apple Carplay. You can do wired, but it also has wireless Apple Carplay as well, which is really nice. And infotainment system itself, which this is actually something that we can do while we're going around here. Sorry if I'm paying attention to the road, so I'm just gonna be kind of scrolling through, but you guys can see response time with it is really good. And I like the size of this infotainment system, and I do have a smaller one. That's one we have in our Defender, and I don't have a problem with that smaller one whatsoever. And I need to go back to the map so I know where I'm going. But yeah, really good response time. You've got this shifter here, which is pretty cool with the Defender, and then we actually have the coolest climate controls in the car industry. Well, some of the coolest. So if I push it in, that's what does the seat adjustment, and then that's fan speed, and then that's the drive mode select right there. It's just cool, the multi-use with the controls. This one also has the air suspension, which is not standard on the Defender itself. On certain packages, like this first edition, I'm pretty sure, well, I've got the window sticker over there, I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure it's standard on this first edition package. And so you do have some nice stuff like that. The air suspension obviously raises and lowers the vehicle. With the Defender, it gives it something like 11.8 inches of ground clearance. Roughly, it gives it a lot of ground clearance, so helps out with off-road capability, and also just makes it so it rides a lot better as well. And then some other options. This one has the refrigerator center console, which is also a really cool option. Now this interior is the upgraded leather interior, and this is just a recommendation from my personal experience owning a Defender. I actually recommend getting the base interior. I know it sounds crazy, but the base leather, our Defender has not as many miles as this. We've got just over 3,000 miles on it, but when I had this as a tester, it had about 3,000 miles on it, and our Defender's leather I feel has held up better. The base leather has the kind of more cowhide texture. I think that's the better route to go with the Defender itself. And then you got the wood and everything here. This spec is definitely interesting with the gray and the white and all of that. Now let's talk about how this Defender 130 drives on these twisty roads that are definitely the home ground of the Defender. I feel like this is more of a vehicle that, my wife and I, for example, it's her daily driver, so it's a vehicle drive around town and then occasionally take off road. I mean, it can do stuff like this really well, actually, though, and that's something that I do want to make a point of. So a lot of people compare the Defender to, Jeep Wrangler, Ford Bronco, Mercedes, G-Wagon, and the reason why it's compared to such a, wide scale of vehicles from a price point perspective is, well, first off, the Defender is significantly more affordable than the G-Wagon, and so that's why a lot of people compare it to Wrangler and Bronco. It's got that same kind of boxy SUV design, but it obviously provides more luxury like the G-Wagon, so that's why people will still compare it to the G-Wagon, even though, this is $90,000, whereas a G-Wagon starts at literally $140,000 before options. So some benefits with the Defender over the vehicles that people commonly compare it against. So first off, Wrangler, Bronco, those are body on frame, and actually, the Defender is the only one in this segment that's actually not on body on frame. So the G-Wagon is also body on frame, and so because this Defender is unibody, it is a lot more rigid compared to the other vehicles, and so it actually helps out with the ride quality quite a bit. And on top of that, this has independent front and rear suspension. Now the G-Wagon has independent front suspension, solid rear axle. Bronco, independent front suspension, solid rear axle. Jeep is still solid front and rear axles. And so with the unibody construction and with the independent suspension, this handles a lot better. So for daily driving, when you go around corners and all that, it's not so wallowy all over the place. The Wrangler is definitely the most wallowy because of the solid axles and body and frame construction, which it makes it fun to drive, but also, you know, kind of nerve-wracking sometimes depending on how fast you go around a corner. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is the Defender is very unique in this segment because it still has the cool boxy styling, and it's still like when you are in this vehicle, you still feel like you're in a tank, but it drives much more modern than the other vehicles. The steering's a lot better, it's a lot more direct. Like going around these corners, if I was in a Wrangler, it'd be body roll like crazy. And you could even see with that Wrangler Sport right there, kind of how it leans in a lot more. And so you've got that. Now, aside from that, one thing that I do want to mention with the Defender that, and this also applies to our 110, but I feel like it applies more to the 130, is over big bumps, the damping isn't all that great. And this is the downside with independent suspension, and more specifically with unibody construction, because it's so rigid. When you go over big enough bumps that it causes big compression with the suspension, it just rocks through the whole body. With a body and frame construction, right, there's some isolation, so you don't feel the bump as much. So it actually, like big bumps with, you know, body and frame vehicles, they don't feel nearly as basically difficult, as hard on the vehicle. So that is a little bit of a downside with the Defender. And then with the 130, I feel like this doesn't ride as well as the 110. You know, what it looks like is obviously they just basically extended the 110 to make the 130. And so it seems like the suspension, everything is tuned for the size of the 110, whereas the 130, I'm not saying it's like a full-on afterthought, but it does feel a little bit more afterthought-y, if that makes sense. And so I think that the 110 definitely rides a lot better. I mean, when I drove my wife's back-to-back with this, when I had this as a tester, I noticed, I was like, wow, my wife's drives so much better. And I'm like, they both have air suspension, right? Ours does have the all-terrain tires, so there is a little bit of a difference there, but I mean, that's not gonna make as big of a difference as you'd think, because the all-terrain tires in the Defender aren't really all that beefy. And so there's kind of that part of it. And so when you put it all together, I really like the driving dynamics of the new Defender, and that's part of the reason why we purchased it. Is it can do the off-roading stuff. I haven't done a ton of off-roading with our Defender quite yet, but from the videos I've seen and everything, and from the little bit of off-roading I've done, it's super capable, but then it's also extremely daily drivable, and you don't get that as much with the Wrangler, the Bronco, and the G-Wagon. First, Wrangler and Bronco, right, you can take half the vehicle apart, and so tons of wind noise, whereas this, you do still get a bit because, you know, upright windshield and all that, but it's actually pretty minimal. And then, you know, with those vehicles, with the body and frame construction and the solid axles and everything, it's just not as, like I said, not as comfortable, not as daily drivable. And then with the G-Wagon's definitely the best when it comes to comfort compared to the Bronco and Wrangler, but I still think that this beats the G-Wagon when it comes to comfort. And this is coming from someone who's a huge G-Wagon fan. And that just comes down to body and frame construction versus unibody, independent suspension versus solid rear axle. The G-Wagon's really good. It's, like I said, it's a lot better than the Wrangler and the Bronco by a long shot. But I'd say that the Defender, it has this nice blend of daily drivability, luxury, and then it is also very capable off-roading. It is a different type of off-roading because with independent suspension, right, you're tipping a lot. So it is different compared to the solid axles where you've got a lot of articulation, so you're not tipping as much. It's a little bit different with that. So quickly in summary, because I realized I didn't summarize this video, I think the Defender is great if you're looking for a daily driver luxury SUV that has cool looks, that can also do some off-roading as well, like go on camping trips and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, this isn't going to be the best all-out off-roader because it's not fully dedicated to off-roading like a Wrangler or like a Bronco. But, you know, if you're like me and my wife that live in Utah where you've got a lot of bumpy roads and, you know, occasionally we go on fun outings and everything, I think it's a great fit because it just does so many things. It's not like the best at anything, but it does so many things really well. And then obviously if you need, you know, more room, the 130 is the route to go. I still think the 110 is the sweet spot, but again, the 130 obviously provides the third row, so you know, some people definitely like that added practicality.